Same old man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for February 25th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Brendan lives!
I do.
You
I
see
do.
him?
I'm alive. I came out of the monkey unscathed.
Came out of the monkey unscathed, and here we are to talk about SLY Lives, or as my wife calls it, SLY Lives. SLY Lives is what she thought the name of this was. Because
I
don't
love
know
your
why.
wife. I love your wife.
I know, absolutely beautiful. She
I guess it's the rhyming scheme of it. SLY Lives. I don't know. Maybe
Well,
it just
and
rolls
that's-
off the tongue a certain
so
way.
So that's part of it, because she saw the logo. If you're watching on YouTube, you see the little graphic we have there for the video. And so I was putting the logo together, and she's like, "What is SLY Lives?" And she thought that was the name of, like a drama. It's like about these SLY lives. And I was like, that is not
Okay, that's fair. That is
at all.
fair.
Like in another context, it makes sense. She's not wrong necessarily.
You know
Just,
we're going to get a movie in a few years called SLY Lives.
SLY Lives.
Right?
Yeah,
It'll be the
exactly.
sequel to Past Lives.
Exactly. Yeah. Be on the lookout for that. And she'll be the first one to review it. She'll be the first one when we get to
Perfect
SLY
double
Lives.
feature.
Exactly. But until SLY Lives hits theaters in 2027, we are here to talk about SLY Lives, aka The Burden of Black Genius. This is the latest documentary from one Questlove, whom we saw his documentary in 2021. We talked about it here on the show, Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. That was a really great documentary.
Agreed.
From 2021.
It was in my top 10 of
loved
that year.
doc a lot. Yeah, it was fantastic. So SLY Lives was in Brendan's top 10 most anticipated of the entire year.
Top 5.
Of 2021.
Yeah, let's
Top
be
5.
even clear. It was in my top 5.
Top 5. Where did you have this exactly? Do you remember?
Number 5 or number 4, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a film Brendan was deeply, deeply looking forward to. It was certainly on my radar as well, because I really loved Summer of Soul.
Yeah.
And this, in some ways, feels a little bit like a spin-off, as Sly and the Family Stone was featured in Summer of Soul briefly.
Yeah, they were one of the performers at the Harlem
They were
Cultural
one of the
Festival.
performers.
In
Yeah,
fact,
yeah.
they were kind of the highlight of that documentary, and I feel like
Yeah.
of that entire fest in many ways. So it makes sense that he would extend off of that that energy, if you will,
Yes.
to make a full documentary about that band.
Absolutely. And that is essentially the premise of it. I don't know if I need to offer up anything more. I mean, that's really what this film is about, as it examines Sly and the band and their journey together through the 70s into the 80s and 90s. As we noted, it is directed by Questlove. I don't know if there's any other context that we need to throw out here. Is there
I don't
anything
think
else?
I don't think so. I guess maybe to go back to why I was looking forward to this film so much, and maybe you are planning on asking me this, my history with the band, Sly and the Family Stone.
Sure. Yeah,
I
you
do
wanna
love
talk
this
about
band.
it?
I do love this
Okay.
band quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that's really the big reason why I was looking forward to this one. They are one of my favorites, and for reasons that the documentary does get into, they are a marriage of multiple genres. As someone like myself that is a musician that really doesn't cater to any one or two specific genres, I love everything that is essentially music. If it's good music, I like it. I don't care how it's categorized. But Sly and the Family Stone was kind of that ethos in some ways. They were a band that defined or defied characterization or categorization in a world and a time that that was kind of frowned upon. The fact that they were a mixed racial band. It's a really provocative and progressive idea that they emulated so well in their music, and the documentary talks about it. And it's why they've always stuck out for me, outside of the fact that they just made groovy music. They just made great music. And as someone that is a bass guitarist, when they feature Larry Graham in a movie like this and he's talking about his bass playing techniques, I just couldn't help but nerd out. I just couldn't help but nerd out seeing that. Yeah. Great bass player.
Okay. Well, that is really fascinating to hear. So you love Questlove as a filmmaker, you love the band, but what did you think about the movie, the documentary SLY Lives?
What a silly question.
It is a silly question.
I dug this. I dug this. Let me put my film critic hat on for just a little bit. I don't like this as much as Summer of Soul. I do think by comparison, it is a bit more conventional. Although I feel like that's maybe kind of a byproduct of the fact that Questlove was given access to so much archival footage and history for Summer of Soul, that movie was always bound to be a very energetic and wonderful experience. He's given similar access for SLY Lives, but by comparison, there is more of a Talking Heads vibe to this one. But it's not, that's not a bad thing, because at the very least, when compared to other failed Talking Heads documentaries that are just not creative whatsoever, Questlove's at least able to give his films a musical energy, given how well these movies are edited. There's really clever editing happening here, especially in the way that the film examines how influential SLY's music was as a form of sampling, essentially, for hip-hop music. The way that it's interspliced with Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation is one of my favorite forms of editing I think I've seen in any type of film that's music related. I love the interplay there. And there's a lot of that happening here that gives the film such a vibrancy and such an energy, on top of the fact that it just tells a very great historical story that I think is worth telling. And if you are a fan of the band, I think you're going to love it. It gets into really interesting notions outside of just the musicality of it that I'm sure we'll talk about. I think it ends in a really interesting way that I want to get into as well. So I don't like it as much as Summer of Soul, but I think that's just given the context of how much access Questlove had for that particular movie and how revolutionary that it was. But SLY Lives, I think, is still a very effective documentary about one of the most influential rock, soul, funk, R&B, psychedelic rock bands of the 60s into the 70s.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. I did like this film as well. I don't love it nearly as much as Summer of Soul. I'm with you. That is a really fantastic film, primarily because it works great as a concert film, one that was forgotten to the history books. But that's also what makes that film so great, is in addition to it being this concert film that was stitched together through that wonderful archival footage, it also becomes an examination on forgotten history and legacy and Black culture. All of that is woven together in this incredibly fascinating way.
Yeah.
SLY Lives, I do really like. However, I do feel like I have to talk about it through two specific avenues. If I'm looking at it as a film, I think it's fine. It is very conventional, to your point. It features a lot of talking heads. It is covering Sly Stone's his progression into becoming this icon, why he was a genius, what made him so great. And then you get the fallout of it, which is quite predictable. And it is the music biopic thing that is admittedly a bit tired. However, I do love the angle here from Questlove, and that's where the subtitle of the film is significant.
Yeah.
Where this could have just been a conventional, mundane biopic of sorts through a documentary lens, seeing the rise and fall and pseudo redemption that we get at the end of Sly Stone. That's all this could have been.
Yeah.
However, he does funnel it through this prism of being a black genius and how that creates these other hurdles that other artists might not face. How it creates a pedestal for black artists in ways that become challenging, problematic, difficult to overcome for some. That element of the film, I do think, is really great. I do love that here.
Yeah.
Especially with how the film opens, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to how to answer that question. And then he goes on to use this story as a mechanism to talk about those challenges.
And it comes full circle. It's actually really good storytelling there. Yeah.
It is really good. It is really good. So I do really like it. I think it's good. I don't think it's great, but I do think it is very, very good functioning as a documentary, given the filmmaking choices and the storytelling choices that we get from Questlove.
Yeah.
The other angle of it for me, and this is where I have to provide a little bit of context, where I'm coming at this very differently from Brendan in the sense that I did not grow up listening to pop music. My music listening as a child was a little bit sheltered, not necessarily because my parents were overly strict. I just didn't find myself listening to pop music all that much.
Yeah, that's
and then
fair.
Once I started to form my identity around film, I veered toward film score.
Yeah.
And that is, without hyperbole, 90% of what I listen to on a daily basis.
It's adorable. It's adorable.
I haven't really mentioned this a whole lot here on the show. Maybe I should. But if you go onto Spotify, I have a playlist that is public. People can go and check it out, of film music that I've gathered over the last, 12, 13, 14 years. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of tracks on there, like 15, 20,000 tracks.
Yeah.
Like,
and
it's
to
insane.
To be clear, it's score tracks, not soundtracks. Score tracks.
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both.
Both, okay.
Yeah. It's score, but if there are songs in there, they do come from film soundtracks. So I'm not just throwing anything in there all willy-nilly.
Yeah, no, I get you. Yeah.
Film-related music, that's mostly what I listen to. So I don't listen to a lot of pop music, even by today's standards either, let alone from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I am not as familiar with the history of Sly Stone, his music, how he came about. All of that was new information to me. So as an educational piece, I did find this informative. I did find it really interesting to hear about how Sly and the Family Stone came together, how close of a family they really were, even though they weren't blood family, most of them anyway. Some of them, but not all of them.
Some of them, but not all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. That was really interesting. And to hear about the creative side of Sly and how this band formed a lot of their music, how they dabbled into various genres, as you were talking about a moment ago, Brendan, and how that evolved over the years. Like that, like as an educational piece, I did find myself pretty riveted by the film in that way.
That's
so
good.
If you come into this and you're not familiar with it as I was, I think you're going to find yourself hooked by what Questlove is doing. So I do think it is effective for newcomers, for those that are ignorant to this story. But I like putting on my film critic hat. I do think it doesn't quite, it's not entirely creative or inventive from a filmmaking perspective, but the storytelling is still very good. Not great, but certainly good. Watching this through two different sets of eyes, if you will, it did create for a unique experience that I did enjoy.
Yeah, Sly's music is really what's giving the film any needed creativity. It's not always coming from the film or what Questlove is doing. And if you do come into this as a fan, or really just as a fan of this type of music in general, while the movie is very Talking Heads like as a documentary, like we've said, I admittedly did love hearing what these individuals had to say about Sly Stone, because it's the stuff I like talking about around music. Hearing
Yeah.
Vernon Reid of the band Living Colour talk about Sly as, and I had this written down, Sly as this like having this ability to sway between R&B, British invasion music, and American psychedelia, I just think is a really neat analysis for this type of music. So hearing that side of it, hearing what George Clinton of Parliament Funkadelic had to say about his experience with Sly Stone in the 80s when they went on tour together. I love hearing about that stuff, even if it's not always right for the most creativity from a filmmaking standpoint. There are times this does feel kind of like a video essay of sorts. I was thinking a lot about something like Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat from last year, but I think that's a very or at least a much more creative example of something that's doing this very thing. But I think it's good to hear that your experience was very different, that it still works as an educational piece for those who might want to learn about this. And I think the film is still energetic enough to make you want to learn about this, whether you like this kind of music or not. Were you did some of the songs that you heard here, did anything sound familiar to you? Like did anything stick out? Like, oh, I know that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to connect it necessarily to Sly and the Family Stone,
Sure.
but yeah, there were several songs that I was familiar with for sure.
And many of them have been on soundtracks to many movies before. I want to take you higher was in one of the montage scenes from David Fincher's Zodiac. So they're very well known examples for those.
Yeah,
of
there's
us
a good
in our
chance
films.
they're on my playlist, and I wouldn't have even known to make the connection. You know, like, oh, that's it for that movie. Just add that to the list and never think about it.
Yeah. But I think where this film is effective, especially in its final third, going back to what you were saying about the way Questlove specifically interviews Black artists, Black musicians, about what it means to be a Black genius and how that burden weighs on them, I think is pretty provocative, especially given the fact that for them, they often talk about how the greatest fear is actually the fear of success as opposed to the fear of failure. And that's a really powerful notion given how historically many people saw Black entertainers as purely entertainers. And that was it. So there's more of a weight on their shoulders to live that life outside of just their entertainment and what that ultimately means. They have more to prove there. And that burden is severely felt for someone like Sly Stone, who became almost an immediate success. Well, maybe not immediate. The film does talk about how his first two albums weren't the most immediate of successes. But when he hit and found an audience, he was able to find an audience within every single demographic and really took off to stardom. I can only imagine how that would affect an individual, especially a Black individual, as he's trying to emphasize here.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating, and this, somewhat circles to a few things that you mentioned earlier, but what I found so compelling about this, again, when I'm looking at this through the prism of not knowing much about these guys beforehand, the idea that this was a racially integrated mixed gender group formed in the 60s when there was so much progressive rioting happening in terms of pushing for those things. Like, that would have been so forward thinking at the time that I do find that really, really fascinating. And the documentary talks a lot about how Prince was very inspired by that specifically. It's fascinating to hear some elements that, through Sly Stone and some of his music making. I think this comes a little bit later in his career. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan, but in the 80s, where he's making these musical, I guess by today's standards we would call them beats, that became kind of the emphasis for early hip hop. I thought was fascinating. Had no idea that he was an inspiration for that movement as well. And then you talk about how there's all these different genres that he's fusing together, and how that becomes a significant pivot point even early on when those first two albums don't really do all that well. And it's kind of crazy to think about this band and the height of their powers and kind of how short it was, right? Because by the time
Mm-hmm.
they rise to prominence, it's the late 60s, early 70s, perhaps.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
1975 when they have that concert, I believe in
Oh,
New
Radio
York,
Radio
that,
City Music Hall where everything
yeah,
fell apart. Yeah.
where everything fell apart. So you have about a 5 year gap where they are at the height of their fame. People cannot touch them musically, creatively, and that's about it. So like
Well,
as
yeah.
influential as they've been, like their run on that pedestal was kind of short lived. Now the band did go on to be active for almost another decade till 1983, I believe, but
Mm-hmm.
things did start to fizzle out in 1975, and you include all the drug use, which is a big part of that from Sly's perspective that the documentary tackles a lot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I say that complimentary. I just find that
Yeah. Yeah.
fascinating that the height of this group and a lot of what they were doing was kind of short lived, but their influence is, always evolving. It's never ending. It's just fascinating to me.
I believe they are one of the most sampled bands in all of hip hop. Watching
Yeah.
Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest, the utilization of Sly Stone's song "Sing a Simple Song" and how that created a backbeat for, I forget the name of the song that they utilized it for. But just watching that process, it certainly kind of confirms how heavily influential they were for that movement.
Mhm.
What is it that they say? Just the royal they. um, all good things tend to last only 10 years, I think is what they say when it comes to art.
Yeah.
Some of the
Yeah.
some of the greatest bands only lasted for 10 years. The Beatles only lasted for about 10 years.
If you're a
Um,
director, you get 10 films. That's it.
Oh yeah, Quentin's
According to
onto something,
Tarantino.
I guess. Well, when it comes to film, I was going to say the Marvel Cinematic Universe because Iron Man to
There you
Endgame
go. Yeah,
was about 10 years.
about 10 years. Yeah.
A band like Led Zeppelin lasted for only 10 years, although their circumstances were a bit more dire. They really chose to conclude things after their drummer John Bonham passed
Yeah.
away.
Mhm.
But I mean, Sly and the Family Stone really had a 10-year period as a band. It wasn't all roses, right? But um, when you look at their discography from 1967 all the way through to maybe 1974, it's a very strong discography. It really is. And you can hear that influence from the earlier revolutionary years where they were fusing all of these different genres together in such a way that hadn't been done before, that was kind of uncalled for the time. And then in the early 70s, they're utilizing drum machines, which is also very stylistically uncalled for the time.
Mhm.
And kind of finding their place in this new form of like downbeat deep funk that was basically the essence of hip hop in many ways. I mean, that album "There's a Riot Going On" is so influential for that exact movement. I just love the musicality and the history behind that so much, that it ultimately really made the movie
Mhm.
worth watching for me, despite some of
Mhm.
the talking heads aspects of it.
I completely agree. The talking heads element from a filmmaking perspective, you know, it's whatever, I guess. It's fine.
Hmm.
Nothing
Hmm.
crazy. But educationally, I was pretty riveted by,
Sure.
and it was interesting to see these talking heads, discuss something that is clearly inspirational to them,
Yeah.
something that they do look up to that at times leaves them speechless.
Hmm.
So that I do think is quite effective in that regard, and especially when you funnel all of it through that thematic lens we talked about earlier of Black Genius, which does trickle down to a lot of what Questlove is doing here from a storytelling perspective,
Hmm.
which I think is fascinating, especially in the
Yeah.
back half of the film when that starts to become more prominent as it gets into Sly's personal behavior and his problems and how that leads to the band dissolving, um, and how it kind of interweaves these interviews where people are talking about Sly's genius directly to him.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that affect you? And you couple that also with the culture of the time, and that's something
Yeah.
that Questlove emphasizes. Given the rise of certain drugs and pop culture and how those things were so readily available.
Yeah.
It's the story of every successful band.
It is,
Like,
yeah, it is.
from that time, every
It
one of them.
it goes through those motions, and that's not really the film's fault because that is history after all. But
That is what happened to him.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But where I think Questlove finds a new angle that makes that familiarity seem fascinating once again is the way he focuses on that burden that we've talked about before. Uh,
Yes.
because like the drugs are a byproduct of that burden in some ways.
Yes.
And the
Yeah.
way that this film concludes, I think, is very fascinating because Questlove kind of treats that burden like a death sentence in a way.
Mhm.
The way this film wraps up, when you actually get interviews with Sly Stone's own family members and his children, it kind of makes the film feel like it's a eulogy of sorts. When in actuality, Sly Stone is still alive. Like that is the
Yeah.
interesting thing. I've never really seen a movie do it in that way. And it continues to acknowledge by the end that he is still living and he's clean now and actually has a connection with his children. I think one of his daughters says he's just an old black man now collecting cars,
Yeah.
which but in doing so and the film choosing, or maybe it was Sly himself, I don't really know, choosing to stay off camera and not actively participate in this
Yeah.
kind of makes it feel like that burden is even heavier. Like it's still weighing on him in a way. And that is a really fascinating way to conclude this story.
I was about to bring that up next. I think what's so interesting, and I don't know how to contextualize this, because in some ways you could critique the film for not interviewing him and getting his perspective since he is still with us. But maybe the ambiguity of it is what gives the film its mystifying, compelling nuances. Like the fact that he's not there and you have all these other people around him talking about his genius, it does demonstrate the vastness of his influence musically speaking, especially when they start to talk about all the different genres that he's kind of dipped his toes into.
Yeah.
I don't know. It does it creates lore around him that he doesn't have to speak to. Like, he can let his genius speak for itself. But I do kind of wonder if he talked about the battles, the mental and physical strain that he may have experienced. Perhaps any sort of financial burdens he may have experienced. But most importantly, the creative element of it and trying to maintain that high, which he clearly could not, like he struggled, which is why he ended up kind of filling that void with a different kind of high, a more physical one.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such an interesting dichotomy, I guess.
I'm looking up why he wasn't included in this documentary as you're talking, just to get a concrete answer here so we don't sit here and hypothesize something that might not be true. But apparently the real reason why he's not here is because of health related reasons.
Okay. And that I was wondering about that as well.
Yeah. And I guess
Questlove
Questlove himself was pretty candid about this. I found an article over on people.com where when they were interviewed about this, I think Questlove said that he feels like it wouldn't have been empathetic to interview Sly Stone here, because I guess they did interview him for Summer of Soul back in 2020. He had just gotten clean by then. But he and the producer, Joseph Patel, openly said Sly Stone can't speak in full sentences right now. And they felt like just given his motor function right now, it wouldn't have been empathetic. I guess they felt like it would have been distasteful to include him here. And if that's the case, I respect that.
That makes sense.
And in a way, the way that Questlove is framing this story and how he chooses to conclude it, like we're talking about, it kind of works as an asset then, because I think it makes that burden feel even more heavy, right? Even heavier. So I think it works in its favor.
Yeah. Even I was talking about that duality there. I was wondering if there was some sort of health ailment, but I wasn't sure. I honestly did not realize if that was the case or not, but that makes sense. And even still, I think the ambiguity and the mystifying of him here, I think it does work for the film.
I agree.
Because it kind of creates this avenue for other people to talk about the effects of his black genius. And he doesn't have to talk about the creative process. The art kind of speaks for itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. And that makes it a very powerful one.
Yeah, I agree. Any other final thoughts you have here on SLY Lives?
If you're listening and you haven't listened to Sly and the Family Stone yet, and you're interested in getting into them, if you're an album person like I am, I recommend albums. I don't recommend songs. I recommend albums. You can't really go wrong with most of them. I am very partial to his 1969 album Stand. That's probably my personal favorite. I understand that an album like There's a Riot Going On from 1971 is probably his most important, his most influential, the one that actually set new standards of what early hip-hop music essentially could be, even though it's not technically a hip-hop album. But Sly was doing things on the production front that would give way to what hip-hop would do later with overdubbing and drum machines and various other dark production techniques like that. But his 1969 album Stand, I think, is quite great, and really maybe captures probably the closest the band has ever sounded to their Woodstock experience, which was around that same time. It almost feels like a live album captured in studio. It's absolutely masterful.
And remind me, because it's been a few years since I've seen it, was it around that time when they did the Summer of Soul Festival?
Yeah, that was the same year. Yeah, so the Harlem Cultural Festival was also 1969, and that was the thing they talked about in that documentary, how everyone remembered Woodstock that same year. But what about this festival that happened I think a few weeks or a few months earlier?
Yeah.
But yeah, the album Stand came out that same year as well. I think it was released in, was that maybe April or May? So just before those festivals actually took place. So it really was a reflection of what the band was doing at that time.
Yeah, fascinating. Yep, fascinating stuff. More documentaries, more music documentaries from Questlove. I'm down for it. Totally down.
Well, you see what his next movie might be?
I do not know.
The Disney live action adaptation of the Aristocats.
Oh. Hilarious. Okay. Look, if anyone can make that work, Questlove for sure could make that work.
I could see him turning a song like Everybody Wants to Be a Cat into an absolute modern banger.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the film ends up being, that musical number itself, it will be worth the price of admission.
I was just going to say it might make it worth it alone.
Exactly. Totally down for that. I did not realize that, though. That is hilarious. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, that'll do it for this conversation. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please hit us up on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Letterboxd, TikTok. You can hit us up everywhere at InSessionFilm. You can always email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. Maybe one of these days we'll put Brendan's phone number on the screen and you can just text him how you feel.
Don't do that.
Maybe
Don't
we'll
do that.
No, all joking aside, though, we do want to hear from you. We have another review available as well. If you want to hear Brendan and I, somehow we got through our conversation on the monkey. Man, what an experience that was.
Yeah. Not good.
Look, I think people have to go check out that review simply for Brendan's opening thoughts, because he brings haymakers. And I was taken aback.
I might have to eat crow on that in a few weeks.
No, own it. Absolutely own it.
It's a very hyperbolic. It's a very hyperbolic statement, which is something I don't like to do unless it's earned. I'm not sure if it was an earned one in this case, but I genuinely feel it in the moment.
No, that's fine. Yeah, let your emotions run you. That's what I say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I let my emotions run me all the time.
I mean, yeah, you wear them on your sleeve. It's your favorite form of clothing.
Exactly. So yeah, you can go and check out that review. It was a lot of fun. Episode 625. We talk about James Bond. We begin the next phase of our Best Picture movie series, where we review The Apartment. It was a great time. And go check out Chasing the Gold. Shadon and friends. They give their final Oscar predictions. Go and check that out. Really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
And there'll be a new women's session coming very soon as well. With that, the next time you hear from Brendan and I, it will be post the Oscars.
Yeah.
So we hope everyone has a great time. Enjoy whatever madness unfolds this weekend. Who knows?
You can edit this, right, JD? We either loved / hated Conan's opening monologue.
Yeah.
We loved that X won Best Picture.
Yep. Yeah, and we could keep going. I mean, yeah, we'll just edit in how it goes. But
there's some we could say. We're happy that Kieran Culkin wins Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, we know a few of them are going to happen. That is 100%. He's going to win that. Yeah. Conclave is going to win for screenplay. Zoe Saldana is going to win. I do kind of wonder about the Timothy Chalamet of it all.
I wonder that. Heck,
I'm even wondering as well.
I'm even wondering.
I mean, a lot of people are like, no, that it doesn't change things for Brody, and maybe not. I don't know, but
I don't know.
What if it does?
I mean, sometimes a good campaign is enough to get the Oscar voters to vote for you.
Yeah, and look, my final thought. I am very, very, very pro Timothy Chalamet speech. I am all for it.
Okay.
100% for it. And I might have to turn this into a t-shirt as well. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, but we treat art as sports. I don't think we should, but that's what we do.
But we do.
And it is extremely refreshing to see one of the players do the exact same thing, recognizing it for what it is, that this is a competition that we have all turned into fandoms.
Oh,
yes. Treat it as sports. Go be great. Yes, Timothy. I love it. Go be great.
I mean, what's the common thing most people do when they watch a sports game now? They drink. Yeah. What are you going to be doing when the Oscars are going on? You're going to drink,
I'm going to be terribly wasted at the Oscars, yes. So look out for my incoherent tweets coming this weekend.
I can't wait for that. Mine will be very coherent. Maybe they'll still be... Nah, they won't be. They won't be coherent. I take that back. I'll be sober, but they won't be coherent.
All right. Well, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the Essential Film Podcast. I love a good quest like that.
I want to take you high.